Texas A&M went from late last week, we must protect this house. We're the only Texas SEC school. We like it that way. We're going to keep it that way. That was the original stance of A&M. And by yesterday, it was, we are prepared for whatever the future holds. Well, that's different. Slightly different tact. So I think that A&M realized one of two things, perhaps two of two things. Number one, they need blockage, major blockage within the SEC besides just them. Okay, they need at least 3 other schools to say no to Texas and Oklahoma to block them. If the SEC gets 11 of 14, they're in. So A&M could even have 2 allies in this. But if they get only 11 of 14 yeses, then they're going to be in anyway. So A&M needs 3 other allies to say no. And frankly, what does anybody else in the conference have against joining forces with Oklahoma and Texas unless it's just shared revenue? We don't want to share the revenue anymore because none of them are really battling geographically within those states with those schools. Oklahoma State's in the Big 12. Obviously, there's no other SEC schools in Texas besides A&M. So are you going to find other allies? Some have said Mizzou would be an ally. Mizzou wouldn't want Oklahoma and Texas in the SEC. However, is there enough of a positive, a windfall for Mizzou to say no versus letting it happen? Number one, Missouri doesn't bring a lot to the table football-wise. And so Missouri doesn't want to risk its standing within the conference. Number two, if the SEC, Greg Sankey and company came to all of these schools and said, okay, yes, we would share revenue right now, but when our next rights fees come up, we all make more money because we are now mega conference, super league, whatever your adjective is, adding Texas and Oklahoma. You'll make more when we add these 2 schools. Who's going to say no to more money? So there's just not enough. It doesn't sound like there's not enough appetite to block this from other schools. So A&M probably realized it doesn't have the numbers to do so. Number two, what it could have realized or been told is, hey, we'll make this worth your while, whatever that means. Now, I don't know if that is a one-time payment that Texas has to make to Texas A&M, that the conference has to make to Texas A&M, whether that means a louder voice at the negotiating table, whether that means that A&M gets to host multiple championships of multiple sports. You never know how this stuff works. They are the host school instead of Texas when they play an SEC championship game in Dallas or an SEC kickoff in Dallas or what have you. I know the SEC championship game is traditionally in Atlanta, but you just never know when these new things come up, what new things are going to happen, yada, yada, yada. There's a million things they can do to sweeten the pot for A&M. That might have also happened. But what it sounded like to me over the weekend after we must protect his hose, we will not let another Texas school in the SEC, it became whatever happens, we're ready for. We would embrace the challenge. That's what A&M's new stance is. And that tells me they are resigned to the fact that they are unable to stop this. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen. It just means that A&M doesn't have the juice to be able to stop it from happening. And the one thing that could have hung it up is local politics, the politicians in the state legislatures, and the state governments, they'll perhaps prevent this from happening. It sounds like that is not on A&M's side either, that there's just not enough resistance from this happening. Now, Texas politics, Oklahoma politics, concerning football, college football, tends to be a dysfunctional, crazy mess. This happened with the Big 8. It happened with the Big 12. It happened with the SWAC. It happened with everything, or the Southwest Conference, rather. It happened with everything. So It certainly could happen again. It happened with getting Baylor into the Big 12. It happened with Texas A&M leaving for the SEC. So who's to say it won't happen? That is certainly on the table. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like it does have the steam of preventing everything from happening. I think also what this does is it causes massive realignment repercussions. I don't think you're going to see something as neat and tidy as if Oklahoma and Texas leave for the SEC, the Big 12 adds Cincinnati and Boise State, and that's it. I think this is the start of massive restructuring. Won't all happen this summer, but we had some somewhat quiet waters over the last 10 years, 8 to 10 years. This is the next round. And I think it's the next round because, number one, you have pots banging on the expansion of the playoff. That's the first thing. As always, you follow the money. What's the answer? It's almost always money. The expansion of the playoff is about more money, and it's about the powers that be in college football recognizing that, hey, let's add numbers to the party. Let's make it a bigger party. Let's make it our party. Our party's going to make a lot of money. That's the first thing. College football drives the bus and everything. That's the first sense things are going to change dramatically if suddenly power brokers are going, yeah, you know what? Let's go 12. Whoa. Number two, NIL. Name, image, likeness. I mean, you got Alabama's quarterback, according to Nick Saban, making almost $1 million in endorsements. $1 million. So that's like $1 million salary for a college kid. There's no way that Toledo and Charlotte and FAU is going to be able to compete in a landscape realistically where the quarterback of Alabama makes $1 million a year. Now, it's not like Toledo and FAU were invited to the party anyway. It's just more of a widening between what college football is for some schools and what college football is for other schools. What this is obviously creating is a divide and a chasm that Toledo shouldn't be in the same anything with Alabama football. That those two are not, those are apples and oranges. That is comparing Mitsubishis and toaster ovens. They're not the same thing. They're not. They're just this. There's nothing common between them besides kids go to school at that institution and they play the same sport. But that's it. That's where this connection dies. So that being said, what you're going to see over the next 10 years, in my estimation, is a complete restructuring where the power conferences or the power schools, let's call them, there's 64 power schools or so, 64, 65, 70, however you want to chop that up. They're going to continually break away with their own rules, their own realities, their own finances, their own everything. And this has been happening already, but it's now going to be even more stark. We have this report, according to The Athletic, citing high-ranking sources within the AAC, the American. The AAC plans to act as an aggressor to try to poach the Big 12's leftovers, potentially as a group. If Oklahoma and Texas leave the Big 12, no disrespect to TCU, no disrespect to Kansas and Kansas State, no disrespect to the rest of the Big 12, Oklahoma State, et cetera. They don't matter anymore. That conference doesn't matter. Kansas basketball is great. Basketball does not drive the bus unless you're in a basketball conference like the Big East. The Big East has done a really nice job reinventing itself, creating a basketball-only conference, getting a good television contract and being a regular into the NCAA party. I mean, the Big 12, they're not a basketball conference. Not to say they don't have good basketball schools. Kansas, obviously, very good. Oklahoma State, routinely very good. But that's not what the Big 12 is known for, nor wants to turn into a basketball-only conference. They've got too many football-playing schools with alumni bases that care and fans that care. The Big East can do this because they don't have football teams. The Big 12 can't. So does the Big 12 combine with the American and make like a 18-team conference, a 20-team conference? And if you have a Big 12 American, where now it's Cincinnati and it's Houston and it's UCF and it's Oklahoma State and it's Memphis and it's Iowa State and it's TCU, is that good enough? I mean, it ain't the SEC. It ain't the Big Ten. But is it good enough? Maybe. But again, these are seismic, huge things that would have to occur. And what the AAC would say is, we need to not be left out of the next party, the next consolidation. So the best way for us to be part of the party is to add schools that will be refused to be left out. But again, if you combine the leftovers of the Big 12 and the American, is there any schools in there that you would say, well, you can't have a college football playoff without that school? Probably not. Now, if you're saying, well, you can't have a giant 65-team mega conference without these schools, okay, maybe so. We have the rumor that the ACC will pressure Notre Dame even further to jump on board as a football playing member. We'll see if Notre Dame has any appetite in that. We'll see if the Pac-12 absorbs schools or wants to absorb schools. Basically, what is going to happen here with Oklahoma and Texas leaving for the SEC, if this indeed happens, is everybody scurrying to the next life raft. How do we save our own asses? How do we remain rich? And that's the bit. Follow the money. These presidents, these chancellors, these athletic directors, and these head coaches don't want to not be rich. They're rich. They like being rich. They're not suddenly going to go down without a fight, because if they are not invited to the party, they're no longer rich. And these people will do anything to protect that pay stub.